Hi there, I'm Suzette Daniels Mims, and these are my stories. Here, you can enjoy authentic accounts of navigating the perils of dating and Christ-centered relationships, including the courage it takes to walk away when a relationship doesn't honor God's best for you. We hope you enjoy this story. Please don't forget to like this video, share this video, and subscribe to this channel for more Christian love stories. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's journey. The Catfish in the Chapel. Chapter 1, The Weight of the Coat. The air in the oncology ward of Atlanta General didn't care about your title. It didn't care if you were the senior pastor of a 5,000-member flock or a man who had spent 8 years in medical school. To the malignant cells under the microscope, everyone was just a host. But to the patients in Ward 4, Dr. Stacy was a beacon, a man who bridged the terrifying gap between science and the supernatural. Stacy walked the halls with a rhythmic, heavy stride, a gait developed from decades of pacing hospital corridors and church aisles. At 58, his skin was the color of dark mahogany, polished by a life of discipline and a refusal to let the stresses of his dual calling crack his exterior. His white lab coat was always starched to a crisp, a sharp contrast to the colorful kente cloth tie he wore beneath it. A subtle, vibrant nod to his heritage and his Sunday morning identity. He stopped at the nurse's station to check the chart for room 302, Mrs. Gable. She was a grandmother, a mother of the church in her own right over at a small Baptist congregation downtown. As he read the latest blood counts, his medical mind processed the O2 saturation and the white cell markers, but his pastoral heart felt the spiritual fatigue radiating from the room. The Shadow of Zenobia. Before he entered, he paused, his hand hovering over the door handle. It was a habit he had picked up 5 years ago, a moment to check his baggage at the door. 5 years. 5 years since he had tucked Zenobia into the red Georgia clay. They had been married for 30 years, 3 decades of good morning sugar and let's pray before we sleep. Zenobia had been the First Lady of Greater Mount Zion, not because of her title, but because of her touch. She was the rhythm to his melody. When she died of the very disease he spent his days fighting, the irony had almost broken him. The music of his life hadn't stopped, but the harmony had vanished, leaving him singing a solo that felt increasingly strained. He entered the room. "Good morning, Mother Gable," he said, his voice dropping into that deep, resonant baritone that could soothe a crying child or stir a sleeping congregation. "Doctor, or should I say pastor today," she whispered, her voice thin but her eyes bright. "Both, I think," Stacy replied, taking her hand. His fingers, long and steady, felt the fragility of her skin. "We're going to adjust the dosage today, but I'm also going to adjust the atmosphere. Can we talk to the master physician for a moment?" As he prayed, his mind flickered to his own empty house. He lived in what the neighborhood called the Big House, a sprawling brick estate in the suburbs. It was a monument to their success, but now it was a museum of his grief. The plastic was still on the lampshades in the formal living room. Zenobia's Bible still sat on her nightstand, a bookmark forever resting in the middle of Isaiah 40. The quiet war of the flesh. He finished the prayer and made his rounds, but the big house waited for him like a predator. He dreaded the 6 p.m. transition. That was when the doctor took off the coat and the pastor took off the public mask, leaving only Stacy, the man. The struggle wasn't just the loneliness, it was the persistent, nagging hum of his own humanity. He was a man of God, but he was a man of flesh and bone. He was healthy, he was vibrant, and his body hadn't forgotten what it felt like to be loved. He would find himself sitting in his study, trying to focus on a sermon about the fruit of the Spirit, while his mind wandered to the simple, forgotten intimacy of a hand resting on his knee while they watched the evening news. He would pace the floor of his home gym, the iron weights clanking in the silence. Clang, clang, clang. He would lift until his muscles burned and his breath came in ragged gasps, trying to exhaust the physical longing that felt like a slow-burning fever. "I'm a shepherd, Lord," he'd groan, wiping sweat from his brow. But even a shepherd needs a companion who isn't one of the sheep. The First Lady-in-Waiting committee at church was relentless. He knew the signals. the extra long handshakes in the greeting line, the emergency counseling sessions that turned into conversations about how lonely a widower must be. He felt like a prize trout in a glass bowl, and the pressure to choose a new queen for the Zion throne was becoming a weight heavier than his medical charts and his pastoral robes combined. He didn't want a queen, he wanted a friend. But in the high-stakes world of the Black church, a man like Dr. Stacy wasn't allowed to just have a friend. He had to have a partner who fit the brand. As he drove home that evening, the sun setting behind the Atlanta skyline, he passed a billboard for a luxury jewelry store. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning ash gray. He was tired of the silence. He was tired of the big house feeling like an empty cathedral. "Lord," he whispered into the leather-scented interior of his car, "I'm a man who deals in life and death every day. Give me a reason to just live." Chapter 2. The Fishbowl and the Fellowship. If the hospital was where Stacy dealt with the biology of life, the church was where he navigated the sociology of it. Greater Mount Zion was more than a building. It was a living, breathing organism with its own rules, hierarchies, and expectations. As a single, successful African-American pastor, Stacy was the centerpiece of a delicate social ecosystem. Every Sunday, the First Lady-in-Waiting Committee was in full effect. It wasn't an official board, but every member knew who they were. There was Sister Patterson, who had been a widow for 10 years and brought healing herbal teas to his office every Tuesday. There was Sister Reed, a high-powered attorney who made sure her tithe envelopes were always handed to him personally with a lingering smile. Stacy felt the weight of their gaze like a physical heat. He couldn't go to the grocery store without being accidentally spotted by a deacon's niece who just happened to be wearing her best Sunday dress on a Tuesday afternoon. "It's a fishbowl, Chase," Stacy said, leaning back in his office chair. The room was lined with leather-bound books and awards, but it felt like a cage. "I love my people, but I can't breathe. I'm a man, not a monument. I want to have a conversation that doesn't feel like a job interview for a position I haven't even posted." Chase, his head deacon and a man who had known Stacy since they were boys playing stickball in the streets of Atlanta, leaned forward. "The Saints want to see you happy, Stacy, but they want you happy on their terms. They want a woman who can lead the Women's Day March and look good in a $300 hat. They're looking for a figurehead. You're looking for a rib." "I need to get away from the zip code," Stacy admitted. "I'm going to the district fellowship in Savannah this weekend. I'm going as a visitor. No robes, no Dr. Stacy on the program. Just a man in the pews." The appearance of the mirage. The fellowship in Savannah was held at a cathedral that rivaled his own. The air was thick with the scent of floor wax and expensive perfumes. Stacy sat near the back, wearing a simple navy blazer, hoping to be invisible. Then he saw her. She walked in during the second hymn, and it was as if the room's oxygen had shifted. Her name was Willow. She moved with a grace that was both practiced and natural. She wore a cream-colored suit that was modest enough for a sanctuary, but sharp enough for a boardroom. Her hair was swept up, showing the elegant line of her neck, and her skin was the color of aged bourbon. Throughout the service, Stacy found his eyes wandering toward her. She didn't look like the women at his church who were trying too hard. She looked settled. She sang with her eyes closed, her hands raised slightly, an expression of quiet, sophisticated piety on her face. When the service ended, the meet and greet began. Stacy tried to slip toward the side exit, but he was intercepted. "You're Dr. Stacy, aren't you, from Greater Mount Zion?" He turned to see her standing there. Up close, Willow was even more striking. Her eyes were bright, and she had a way of looking at him that made the rest of the crowded vestibule vanish. "I am," he said, his voice dropping into its natural, resonant depth. "And you are?" "Willow," she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm and her skin was soft. "I've followed your work in the oncology journals, and I've seen your sermons online. You have a gift for making the complex feel simple. That's a rare thing in a man of your stature." The flattery was subtle, seasoned with just enough intelligence to make it feel like an observation rather than a pitch. The illusion of alignment. They spent the next hour talking. Willow told him she was a member of a prominent church 2 counties over. She spoke of her boutique chain that catered to professional women of faith. She spoke of her foundation for at-risk youth. "I've been a widow for 4 years," she said softly as they walked toward the parking lot. "People think that because you have a successful business and a seat on the board, you don't need anyone. But the higher you go, the lonelier the view becomes." The words hit Stacy like a physical blow. It was exactly what he felt. For the first time in 5 years, he felt a spark of something that wasn't just physical. It was the illusion of shared experience. The warning and the want. As he drove back to Atlanta that night, Stacy felt a lightness in his chest. But beneath that lightness, there was a tiny, nagging check in his spirit. A quiet, internal vibration that usually preceded a medical complication or a spiritual crisis. Is she too perfect? He wondered. Is she the answer to my prayer or the answer to my loneliness? He thought about the abstinence he had guarded so fiercely. With Willow, the fire felt different. It wasn't just a biological urge, it was a desire to be known. But he was a man who knew that in the oncology ward, a tumor can look like healthy tissue until you look at it under the right light. He reached for his phone to call Chase, then stopped. He didn't want a watchman right now. He wanted to believe that for once, the man in the coat was allowed to have something for himself. He silenced the check in his spirit and turned up the radio, letting a smooth jazz station drown out the quiet voice of his own discernment. He was a pastor, a doctor, and a pillar. But tonight, he was just a man who had met a woman named Willow, and for the first time in years, the big house didn't feel quite so empty. Chapter 3: The Fragrance of the Trap. The dating began with the careful precision of a high-stakes chess match. Stacy, ever mindful of his reputation and the sanctity of the pulpit, insisted on discretion. They met in upscale restaurants in Buckhead or hidden gems in Midtown, places where the lighting was dim, the jazz was soft, and the pews of Greater Mount Zion felt 1,000 miles away. Willow was a master of the long game. She didn't press for intimacy, which only made Stacy's struggle with abstinence more profound. She respected his boundaries, often being the one to suggest they end the night with a prayer just as the tension between them reached a breaking point. "You are a man of such conviction, Stacy," she whispered one night in the foyer of her impeccably decorated apartment. The air smelled of expensive sandalwood and fresh lilies. "It's your strength that draws me to you. Most men in your position would have faltered by now." Stacy felt a swell of pride. He was being validated in the very area where he felt most vulnerable. He didn't see that her praise was a form of fencing. She was building a pedestal so high that he would be too afraid of the fall to question the ground she stood on. The first leak. The first crack in the mirage appeared 6 weeks into their courtship. They were sitting at a secluded table at the sundial, the city of Atlanta sprawling like a carpet of diamonds beneath them. Willow seemed distracted, her usual effortless poise replaced by a subtle, rehearsed melancholy. "Willow, you've barely touched your lobster," Stacy noted, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. She let out a long, shuddering breath. "It's nothing, Stacy. I shouldn't burden you. You deal with life and death all day. My business headaches are trivial." "If it matters to you, it matters to me," he said, his pastor's voice taking over, nurturing, authoritative, and ready to solve. "It's the Buckhead boutique," she sighed, leaning back. "The contractors hit an old utility line. The city is being impossible, and my liquid capital is tied up in the spring inventory for the Savannah branch. If I don't settle the permit fees by Friday, they'll pull the license. It's only $15,000, but it's the principle of the delay." She trailed off, looking out the window. She didn't ask for the money. She simply presented a need that a man of Stacy's stature could easily resolve. The conflict of the two minds. In that moment, Stacy's medical mind and his pastoral mind went to war. The medical mind, trained in diagnostics, noted the lack of specific detail. Why hadn't the insurance handled a utility strike? Why was a chain owner so low on liquid reserves? The pastoral mind, however, was clouded by the human heart. He saw a virtuous woman in distress. He saw an opportunity to be the protector he hadn't been able to be for Zenobia in her final months. He saw a chance to secure the loyalty of the woman who made the big house feel like it might one day be a home again. "Consider it handled, Willow," he said firmly. "Oh, Stacy, no, I can't let you—" "I'm not letting you do anything." he interrupted, feeling a rush of masculine pride that acted like a sedative to his discernment. I am sowing into your vision. Between your boutiques and my ministry, think of the kingdom impact we'll have together. Willow smiled, and for a fleeting second, the warmth in her eyes didn't reach her lips. It was a predatory glint, gone before he could process it. Together, she echoed. I like the sound of that. The scrutiny of the watchman. That Sunday, Chase stopped Stacy in the hallway behind the choir loft. The service had been powerful. Stacy had preached on the wisdom of Solomon, but Chase's face was a map of concern. Stacy, a word? Chase steered him into the quiet of the vestry. I saw you leaving that French place on Thursday. I wasn't spying. I was just picking up a cake for my wife's birthday. I saw who you were with. Stacy stiffened, adjusting his cufflinks. And I know that look, Stacy. You have the look of a man who's buying what he wants to see, not what's actually there. I did some casual checking with the brothers over in the Savannah district. Nobody's heard of a Willow Tree boutique chain. They know a woman who looks like her, but she goes by a different name over there. Stacy's face hardened. Chase, I appreciate your concern, but you're being cynical. Willow is a woman of means and ministry. Maybe your sources are just gossiping. Stacy, listen to me, Chase said, his voice dropping an octave. Loneliness is a loud preacher. It'll make you hear hallelujah when the devil is just clearing his throat. Just take a beat. Don't sign anything, and don't give her the keys to the kingdom yet. Stacy walked out of the room without answering. He felt a simmering resentment. He had spent his whole life being the responsible one, the godly one, the doctor, the pastor. For once, he wanted to be the happy one. He didn't realize that by silencing his best friend, he was cutting the last tether to the shore before the storm hit. That night, he didn't go home. He drove to the hospital, seeking the only other place where he felt he had control. But as he sat in the oncology ward looking at a patient's declining chart, he felt a strange, hollow ache. He stood up and headed toward the elevator. He didn't want his office. He wanted the basement. He wanted the cafeteria. His spirit was looking for a different kind of check, the kind that didn't come from a bank account, but from a woman named Zizi who was currently moping the floors and waiting for the tired doctor to show up. Chapter 4: The Basement and the Ballroom. While the world of Willow was a ballroom of high-stakes appearances, the world of the hospital basement was a sanctuary of raw, unvarnished truth. Stacy found himself retreating to the cafeteria earlier and earlier, arriving long after the dinner rush had ended and before the breakfast prep began. The cafeteria was a sea of empty orange chairs and the low, rhythmic hum of industrial refrigerators. It was a liminal space where life and death didn't feel like a battle, but a cycle. Zizi was there, as she always was. She was a woman who moved with a grounded grace. She didn't float or glide like Willow. She planted her feet. She was African American in the way that felt like ancestral soil, dark-skinned, sturdy, and possessing eyes that looked like they had seen everything but decided to remain kind anyway. "You're late," she said, not looking up from the stainless steel counter she was sanitizing. "I was about to put the lemon cake in the leftovers bin, and we both know that's a sin." Stacy pulled out his usual chair. The plastic creaked under his weight. "It's been a long day, Zizi. A lot of emergency calls." "Emergency for who?" she asked, finally looking at him. She leaned against the counter, her arms crossed over her yellow apron. "The patients? Or that storm you're chasing outside these walls?" Stacy paused, his hand hovering over his Bible. "What makes you think I'm chasing a storm?" "Because you have the look of a man trying to convince himself he's not wet while he's standing in a downpour," she said simply. She walked over and set a thick ceramic mug of coffee in front of him. "I've been a widow for 10 years, Dr. Stacy. I know what it looks like when a man is trying to fill a hole in his heart with a trophy instead of a bandage." The unseen bond. For the next hour, they didn't talk about theology or medicine. They talked about the mundane things that make up a life. Zizi told him about her son, who was struggling with a business of his own, and her daughter, who had just been accepted into a nursing program. She spoke about the cost of eggs and the way the light hit the stained glass in her small storefront church on Sunday mornings. Stacy found himself leaning in. He wasn't Pastor Stacy here. He wasn't the great oncologist. He was just a man who liked the way this woman's voice sounded like a cello in a room full of shrill flutes. "Why do you stay here, Zizi?" he asked. "With your spirit, you could be doing anything." "I like the basement," she said, her eyes twinkling. "In the basement, you know exactly what's holding the building up. People upstairs think the fancy crown molding is what matters, but I like being down here with the pipes and the furnace. It's honest work." The two realities. Later that night, Stacy met Willow for a midnight toast at her apartment. She was wearing a silk robe that cost more than Zizi probably made in a month. The air was thick with the scent of $300 candles and expensive wine. "Stacy," Willow purred, sliding a document across the marble kitchen island. "I've been thinking, since you're so invested in the Buckhead project, it only makes sense to make you a silent partner. I just need you to sign these papers so the bank can list your assets as collateral. It's just a formality, really." The check in Stacy's spirit wasn't a vibration anymore. It was a siren. He looked at the papers. He thought about the honest, calloused hands of Zizi. He thought about the way Zizi had looked at him, not as a partner or a provider, but as a man who was clearly hurting. "I need to have my lawyer look at this, Willow," he said, his voice cooler than usual. Willow's expression shifted. It was a momentary flicker, a tightening of the jaw, a hardening of the eyes, before the virtuous woman mask snapped back into place. "Of course, darling. I forget how cautious you have to be. It's just, I thought we were building a future. I thought we were past the lawyer stage." She leaned in, her perfume cloying and heavy, and kissed him. It was a kiss meant to distract, to overwhelm the senses and silence the mind. Stacy left her apartment shortly after, feeling not like a man in love, but like a man who had narrowly escaped a trap. He drove back to his big house, but he didn't go inside. He sat in his driveway, the engine idling, watching the moonlight hit the brick. He realized he had spent 30 years with a woman who was his foundation, and for the last year, he had been trying to replace her with a facade. He was a doctor who could diagnose a stage 4 tumor, but he couldn't diagnose the rot in his own romantic life. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, he prayed a truly honest prayer. "Lord, I am lost in my own longing. Strip away the ballroom. Give me the basement. Give me the truth." Chapter 5. The Cracks in the Facade. The air in the big house had grown colder, and it wasn't the thermostat. Stacy found himself moving through his chores like a man underwater, slow, muffled, and heavy. He was caught between two worlds: the high glitz, high-pressure demands of Willow's empire and the quiet midnight truth of the hospital basement. The neighboring church strategy that Stacy had used to keep his private life private was beginning to backfire. In the tight-knit world of the Black church, private is often just another word for pre-published. The Sunday scrutiny. That Sunday, the atmosphere at Greater Mount Zion was electric, but not with the Holy Ghost. It was the hum of the grapevine. Stacy stood in the pulpit, looking out over a sea of Sunday hats that looked like a garden in full bloom. But beneath those brims, eyes were narrow. Pastor looked a little distracted during the invocation, Sister Patterson whispered to Sister Reed in the third row. "That's because his mind is over at Ebenezer West," Reed whispered back, her fan clicking rhythmically. "I heard that businesswoman he's seeing was spotted at the jewelry mart looking at 5-carat stones, and she wasn't using her own credit card." Stacy felt the shift in the room. As a preacher, he was sensitive to the unspoken. He tried to push through with a sermon on the spirit of discernment, ironically enough, but the words felt like dry crackers in his mouth. He was preaching to them about seeing through the enemy's lies, while he himself was writing checks to a mirage. The confrontation at the gala. The boiling point came at the Savannah District Clergy Gala. It was an event Stacy couldn't skip, and Willow had insisted on being his date. She arrived at his house in a gown of midnight blue sequins that draped over her like liquid moonlight. "You look expensive, Willow," Stacy said. his voice flat. I look like the woman who belongs on the arm of the most powerful man in the city, she countered, adjusting his silk bow tie. Smile, Stacy. Tonight is about branding. We're the new power couple. The gala was a whirlwind of handshakes and forced smiles. But as they moved through the ballroom, Stacy noticed the way the other pastors' wives looked at Willow. It wasn't admiration. It was a cold, clinical assessment. The facade cracked in the powder room. Stacy was standing near the buffet when he heard a group of women from Willow's supposed home church talking. Who is that woman with Dr. Stacy? A voice asked. She says her name is Willow, says she owns boutiques in Savannah. A sharp, mocking laugh followed. Boutiques? That's Marlena. She hasn't been in Savannah in 3 years, not since the DA started asking questions about that senior housing fund she was running for Bishop Long. She's no more a businesswoman than I am an astronaut. The weight of the revelation. Stacy felt the floor tilt. The room, with its crystal chandeliers and gold-leafed moldings, suddenly felt like a tomb. He looked across the room at Willow. She was laughing, tossing her head back, her hand resting on the arm of a young, wealthy deacon. He realized Chase had been right. Sister Patterson had been right. His own spirit had been right. He had been so terrified of being a lonely old man that he had traded his integrity for a silk robe and a soft voice. He didn't confront her in the ballroom. He was a man of decorum, and he wouldn't give the gossips the satisfaction of a public scene. Instead, he walked out. He didn't tell her he was leaving. He simply handed his valet ticket to the attendant and drove. He didn't drive to the big house. He drove to Atlanta General. The return to the basement. It was 1:15 a.m. The hospital was in its blue hour, that quiet time when the world feels suspended between the living and the dying. He headed straight for the elevator and hit the B button. The cafeteria was nearly dark. Only the lights over the prep station were on. Zizi was there, sitting at a table with a small ledger and a calculator. She looked up as he approached, her face devoid of the ballroom makeup, her hair wrapped in a simple scarf. "You're in your suit," she said, her voice a calm anchor in his storm. "But you're wearing it like a shroud, Stacy." He sat down across from her, his head in his hands. "I've been a fool, Zizi, a monumental public fool." "Did the gold turn into brass?" she asked softly. "It turned into ash," he whispered. "Everyone saw it but me. Why was I so blind?" Zizi reached across the table. Her hand was warm, her grip solid. "Because you were hungry, Stacy, and a hungry man will eat a plastic apple if it's shiny enough. You didn't want the woman. You wanted the first lady she was pretending to be. You wanted the version of yourself that wasn't lonely." For the first time since Zenobia died, Stacy let the tears fall. They weren't just for the scam. They were for the 5 years of suppressed grief, the pressure of the pulpit, and the exhaustion of being a pillar. "What do I do now?" he asked. "Now," Zizi said, standing up and heading toward the coffee pot. "You stop trying to be a pillar and start being a person. You go home, you pray, for real this time, and tomorrow you call the people who actually love you, not the ones who love the coat you wear." As she poured him a cup of coffee, the steam rising in the quiet basement, Stacy looked at her. He saw the strength in her shoulders, the peace in her eyes, and the way she held the mug, with a steady, unpretentious grace. The ballroom was gone, the mirage was over. But in the basement of a hospital, over a cup of industrial coffee, Stacy felt the first spark of true discernment he'd had in a year. Chapter 6: The Strategy of the Watchman. Stacy didn't go home until the sun began to bleed over the Atlanta skyline, turning the glass skyscrapers into pillars of fire. He sat in his driveway, the engine of his car clicking as it cooled, watching the neighborhood wake up. For months, he had been living in a house of mirrors. Today, he was going to start breaking them. He didn't call Willow. He didn't text her to explain why he had vanished from the gala. Instead, he called Chase. "I need the watchman," Stacy said when his friend answered on the second ring. 2 hours later, they were huddled in Stacy's study. The room, usually reserved for sermon prep and theological debate, had been transformed into a war room. Chase had brought a folder, this one thicker than the last, and a contact from his days in the city's legal department. The paper trail of a predator. "Her name isn't Willow. It isn't even Marlena Vance. Well, that's just the name she used in Savannah, Chase said, spreading documents across the mahogany desk. Her birth name is Denise Watkins. She's a professional affinity scammer. She targets high-profile men in the Black community, pastors, doctors, funeral home owners, men with deep pockets and a public reputation to protect. Stacy looked at the list of donations he had made. The $15,000 bridge loan, the $5,000 missionary seed, the $10,000 for the legal fees. She uses the First Lady dream as bait, Chase continued, his voice heavy with empathy. She knows that in our culture, the pastor's wife is a position of ultimate respect. She plays the role perfectly because she knows that's what we're trained to look for, the poise, the scripture, the suit. And the bank papers? Stacy asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. The ones she wanted me to sign at her apartment? That's the hook, Stacy. If you had signed those, she would have had the power of attorney over your personal accounts. She wasn't just looking for a donation. She was looking to liquidate the big house and everything Zenobia left behind. The righteous anger. Stacy felt a cold, sharp anger rising, not just at her, but at the way she had weaponized the language of the kingdom. She had used sowing and reaping to steal. She had used prayer to distract. How do we do this, Chase? I want her gone, but I can't have this dragging the church through the mud. The saints are already whispering. We don't go to the pulpit with this, Stacy. We go to the precinct. But first, we need her to commit one more act. We need her to come for the big ask. The trap is set. Stacy's phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Willow. Stacy, darling, you disappeared last night. I was so worried. Are you okay? The bank called again about the Buckhead papers. Can we meet for lunch? Stacy looked at Chase. The deacon nodded slowly. Stacy typed back, his fingers steady. I'm sorry, Willow. An emergency at the hospital. Lunch is fine. Let's meet at the club. Bring the papers. I'm ready to move forward with our future. He felt sick as he hit send. He was using the very thing he preached against, deception, to catch a deceiver. But as a doctor, he knew that sometimes you have to use a small amount of poison to kill a larger infection. The sanctuary of the basement. Before the lunch, Stacy found himself back at the hospital. He didn't have rounds, but he needed to see Zizi. He found her in the loading dock, supervising the delivery of the week's produce. You look like a man about to perform surgery, she said, wiping her hands on her apron as she walked over. In a way, I am, Stacy said. I'm cutting out a tumor today. Zizi looked at him, her eyes searching his. Be careful, Stacy. When you cut deep, sometimes the patient bleeds in ways you didn't expect. Don't let her bitterness get on your spirit. You're doing what's right, but don't do it with a heart of stone. How do you stay so soft, Zizi, after everything you've seen? She smiled, and for a second the exhaust fumes of the loading dock felt like the incense of a sanctuary. Because I know who holds the scalpel, Stacy. I just do the cleaning. You go do what you have to do. I'll have a slice of cake waiting for you when the air is clear. The confrontation at the club. The Highland City Club was the pinnacle of Black excellence in Atlanta. It was a place of dark wood, leather chairs, and quiet conversations about power. Willow arrived looking radiant in a butter-yellow dress, the image of sunshine and virtue. Stacy, she cooed, leaning in to kiss his cheek. You had me so worried, but I knew you'd come around. Our vision is too big for small misunderstandings. She laid the folder on the table between the crystal water glasses. The bank just needs your signature on the collateral agreement. Once this is done, the Buckhead boutique opens, and we can finally announce our engagement to the board. Stacy looked at the papers. He looked at the woman he had thought was his second chance. You know, Denise, he said, his voice quiet and terrifyingly calm. I spent all night reading, not the Bible, though I did some of that too. I spent the night reading your arrest record from Birmingham. The color drained from Willow's face so fast it was as if a curtain had been pulled. She didn't move. She didn't blink. And then I read about the senior fund in Savannah, Stacy continued. You have a beautiful gift for storytelling, but you forgot one thing. A shepherd's job isn't just to lead the sheep, it's to kill the wolf. Willow's eyes narrowed, the honey in her gaze turning to acid. You think you're so holy, Stacy? You're just a lonely man who wanted a pretty doll to show off to your congregation. You bought the lie because you were too proud to be alone. You think the police will care? I haven't broken any laws yet. You gave me that money freely. I didn't call the police, Denise, Stacy said, leaning in. I called the district attorney, and I called the 5 other fiancés you have currently investing in your boutiques. They're all waiting in the lounge. As if on cue, Chase walked into the dining room, followed by 2 men in suits and 2 uniformed officers. The scene was quiet, efficient, and devastating. There was no shouting, only the rhythmic clicking of handcuffs. As she was let out, Denise turned back to him, her face twisted in a snarl. You'll still be alone in that big house, Stacy. You'll still have nothing but a dead woman's pictures. Stacy watched her go. He felt a wave of exhaustion, but for the first time in a year, the big house didn't feel like his destination. He stood up, adjusted his coat, and walked past the luxury of the club. He didn't want the ballroom. He didn't want the pedestal. He headed for the one place where he knew the light was always on, and the truth was served with a side of lemon cake. Chapter 7. The Dust and the Dinner. The scandal didn't stay quiet, it couldn't. In the ecosystem of the Black church, news of a wolf in the fold travels faster than the benediction. By Wednesday night's Bible study, the pews were packed with congregants who weren't just there for the word, they were there for the word on the street. Stacy stood behind the pulpit, looking out at the faces he had served for decades. He saw pity in some eyes, judgment in others, and a deep, quiet concern in the eyes of the mother's board. He realized that as a pastor, he had tried to protect his image, but as a man, he had nearly sacrificed his integrity. I have a confession, Stacy said, stepping out from behind the heavy oak lectern. He stood on the floor of the sanctuary at the same level as the people. I preached to you about discernment while I was walking in darkness. I let my loneliness become a god, and I let a mirage lead me away from the spirit. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Stacy didn't make excuses. He told them how he had been blinded by the First Lady archetype. He told them how he had prioritized the look of a partner over the spirit of a helper. I am a doctor who failed to diagnose his own heart, he said, his voice thick with emotion, and I ask for your forgiveness. A low amen rippled through the room. Sister Patterson stood up, her hat shimmering under the chandeliers. Pastor, she said, her voice steady, we didn't come here for a perfect man. We came here for a man who knows how to repent. The wolf is gone. Let's get back to the shepherd. The clearing of the air. For the first time in months, Stacy felt the weight of the big house lift. He went home that night and finally took the plastic off the lampshades. He boxed up the expensive gifts Marlena had manipulated him into buying and sent them to the local women's shelter. He realized that the abstinence struggle he had been fighting so bitterly wasn't just about the flesh, it was about a lack of peace. He had been trying to satisfy a spiritual hunger with a physical distraction. The next morning, he went to the hospital with a different spirit. He finished his rounds in record time, his patients noting that the doctor's hands felt warmer today. At 11 p.m., he didn't head for the exit. He headed for the basement. The real date. The cafeteria was quiet, but the atmosphere had changed. Zizi was at the counter, her back to him, humming a song he recognized. I won't complain. The air smells better today, she said without turning around. The storm has passed, Zizi, Stacy said, leaning against the counter. She turned around, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked at him, really looked at him, and a slow, knowing smile spread across her face. You look like Stacy today, just Stacy. I am just Stacy, and just Stacy has a question. He paused, feeling a nervousness he hadn't felt since he was a teenager in a suit too big for him. Zizi, I've spent a year taking a ghost to 5-star restaurants. I've spent a year trying to impress a woman who didn't exist. I'd like to take a real woman to a real dinner. No titles, no pastor, no doctor, just me and you. Zizi looked down at her apron, then back at him. Stacy, I'm a cafeteria worker. I spend my days in a hairnet and my nights with a mop. Your people, they're looking for a queen. My people have had enough queens, Stacy said, his voice dropping into that velvet baritone. They need a mother, they need a sister, and I need a friend who knows that the basement is what holds the building up. I don't want a woman to stand on a pedestal, Zizi. I want a woman to stand with me. Zizi's eyes shimmered. I've got an early shift on Friday, but I think I can find something in my closet that doesn't smell like floor wax. The revelation of the soul. They didn't go to Buckhead. They went to a small, family-owned soul food spot on the west side, a place where the walls were covered in photos of civil rights leaders and the air smelled of fried green tomatoes and smothered chicken. They sat in a corner booth, the red vinyl cracked but comfortable. Stacy found himself talking about his childhood, about his father's garden, and about the fear he felt the first time he lost a patient. Zizi talked about her late husband's laugh and the way she had to trust God when the bank almost took her house. There was no branding. There was no vision for the kingdom. There was just two people, midway through their lives, finding beauty in the truth. As they walked to the car, Stacy reached out and took her hand. Her palm was warm, her grip honest. In that moment, the biological longing he had struggled with for 5 years didn't feel like a fire to be fought. It felt like a light to be shared. Zizi, he whispered as he opened the car door for her. I think the Lord had to send me through a desert to make me appreciate the well. The well was always here, Stacy, she said, her voice a soft anchor in the night. You just had to stop looking for a fountain. As he drove her home, Stacy looked at the Atlanta skyline. It was the same city, but the view was different. He wasn't a lonely man in a big house anymore. He was a man who had finally found his discernment, not in the glitter of a ballroom, but in the heart of a woman who knew that the most important part of any building is the foundation. Chapter 8: The Foundation of Zion. The news of Pastor Stacy dating the cafeteria worker from the hospital didn't travel through the church like a wildfire. It moved like a slow, steady tide. At first, there was a collective gasp of disbelief. The committee was in a state of quiet revolt. Sister Reed was heard saying at the hair salon that she didn't understand how a man of such intellectual caliber could settle for someone who served mystery meat for a living. But Stacy didn't hide Zizi. He didn't tuck her away in the corners of midtown restaurants. The following Sunday, for the first time in 5 years, Stacy didn't enter the sanctuary from the side door of the vestry. He walked through the front doors, right down the center aisle, with Zizi on his arm. She wasn't wearing sequins or a $300 fascinator. She wore a simple, elegant navy dress and a single strand of pearls. She didn't walk with the practiced runway stride of Marlena. She walked with the quiet, unshakable dignity of a woman who had already been through the fire and didn't fear the heat of a few judgmental glances. The litmus test of the spirit. Stacy seated her in the second row, not the first lady's chair yet, but close enough to be seen. He then climbed the steps to the pulpit. Today's message is simple, Stacy began, his voice echoing with a clarity the congregation hadn't heard in years. It's titled "The Stone the Builders Rejected." We often look for the blessing in the high places. We look for it in the gold, the titles, and the prestige. But God has a habit of hiding his greatest treasures in the places we refuse to look. He hides them in the basements. He hides them in the service lines. He hides them in the people who aren't trying to be seen because they're too busy being used. He looked directly at Zizi. For a moment, the 5,000 people in the room vanished. I spent a year looking for a queen to fit a crown. I found a woman who was already wearing a crown of service, and I almost missed her because I was looking for a label. By the time the choir broke into the invitational, the atmosphere in Greater Mount Zion had shifted. The mothers of the church, led by Sister Patterson, were the first to move. They didn't go to the altar, they went to the second row. They surrounded Zizi, not with scrutiny, but with the holy hug of the sisterhood. The new wine in new wineskins. The wedding was 6 months later. It wasn't a district event with cameras and local politicians. It was a family affair in the very hospital chapel where Stacy had prayed over so many patients. Chase stood as the best man, tears unashamedly rolling down his face. You found your rib, bruh, Chase whispered as Zizi walked toward them. The big house was transformed. Zizi didn't try to erase Zenobia's memory. Instead, she invited Stacy to tell stories about her. She kept the photos up, but she opened the windows. She filled the kitchen with the scent of real spices and the sound of gospel radio. But the real transformation was at the church. Zizi refused to be a figurehead. She stepped down from her job at the hospital, but she didn't stop serving. She turned the First Lady Circle into the Zion Community Resource Center. She used her years of experience in the hospital to start a patient advocacy program. She walked the streets of the surrounding neighborhoods, not in heels, but in sneakers, finding the mothers who were struggling to feed their children and the seniors who were lonely in their own small houses. The full circle. 1 year after their marriage, Stacy found himself back in the hospital cafeteria at midnight. He wasn't there to hide anymore. He was there to pick up ZZ, who was finishing a volunteer training session for the new hospital chaplains. He sat in the same orange chair where he had once felt so lost. He looked at the counter where he had first seen her. "You're late, Dr. Pastor," a voice joked. He looked up to see a young man, a new resident, sitting across the room, looking as exhausted as Stacy used to be. ZZ walked out from the kitchen area, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to the young doctor and then walked over to Stacy. "He looks like he's chasing a storm," she whispered to Stacy, nodding toward the resident. "Give him a slice of lemon cake, ZZ," Stacy said, standing up and taking her hand. "And tell him that the basement is the best place to find the light." As they walked out of the hospital together, the abstinence struggle was a distant memory, replaced by the deep, soulful satisfaction of a man who was no longer just a pillar or a doctor or a pastor. He was a husband. He was a partner. The wolf was in prison, the mirage was forgotten, and the big house was finally, truly, a home. Stacy realized that discernment wasn't just about seeing the devil's lies. It was about having a heart clean enough to recognize God's truth even when it's wearing a yellow apron and serving coffee in the dark. And so, the altar and the oncology ward became one, a testament that while medicine can treat the body, only a love rooted in truth can heal the soul. This is the story of Pastor Stacy and his ZZ, 2 people who found that the greatest miracles don't always happen under the steeple, but sometimes they start in the basement. Oh, my eyes are a bit damp. Am I the only one who's jealous of Chase and Zenobia? God bless them both with the one twice. I haven't found my one yet. But seriously, you guys, we must learn to know the difference between real discernment and real longing. They are not the same. Well, that brings us to the end of our time together today. Please remember to like and share this video and subscribe to this page. Join us again every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday as we embark on new journeys. Au revoir, and always remember who you are and whose you are. Until next time.